So Nibiru is coming. Have you seen these? Every so often you get these big thing on Facebook. Nibiru is coming. It's going to kill us all. NASA confirms Nibiru is coming. It hasn't. So calm down. But Planet X, the ninth planet, might actually exist. And there is proper evidence for it, not just Facebook memes. So we've got these guys, Konstantin Batygin and Mike Brown, back in 2015. They did a computer model of the solar system. And they basically confirmed what's been said for 2 centuries.
Yeah, since the early 1800s, I think, yeah.
Yeah. That some of the movements of the planets, particularly Neptune, don't quite make sense. They only make sense if there's another large object in our solar system that we've not found. These guys are looking at objects in the Kuiper belt, and they keep calling them KBOs, Kuiper belt objects. So large exoplanet, large objects in the Kuiper belt, and their orbits don't make sense. So an AU is an astronomical unit, and it's about 98 million miles. But when we start talking about the solar system, like Pluto, you need to start talking about in astronomical units. Yeah. So when they did their studies back in 2015, they said Nibiru, or this large object, would have an orbit that is about 10,000 to 20,000 years, which is interesting. We'll talk about that in a sec. Would have a mass roughly 10 times that of the Earth, but Neptune sort of sized object. It would have a very ecliptical orbit, and it would basically go way out. I mean, they were talking about it going 200-300, even more AUs out, way beyond even Pluto, and then coming back again. So I found that interesting when they said this 10,000 to 20,000 year thing, because a lot of what we talk about when we talk about natural disasters on this planet, there seems to be this 12,000 years seems to come up a lot.
Yeah, 13,000 years. Yep, it does.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about the Younger Dryas event, events before then, seeing massive flooding events and so on and so on. It seems to be this 12,000 year gap, isn't there? Big extinction events as well. The reason why we'll talk about this in a moment, though, is this has actually had a big review. And they've reviewed all the data, they've gone over the computer studies again, and they've come up with some new figures. So they think it would actually only be about 5 Earth masses. It would go 400 to 500 astronomical units out away from the sun and come back again. Pluto is only 39.5 AUs out. So, I mean, you could consider the difference there, basically. This thing goes much, much further than Pluto. But these two scientists have basically come out and said they believe there's an 80 to 90% chance that Planet X does exist.
Oh, no, better than that. Mr. Batygin, what was his name? I think, is it Batygin or Batygin? I think it's Russian, I believe. He actually stated that the mathematics, they're now 99.9% sure that this planet exists. And as mathematics is the language of the universe, and we predicted Uranus, didn't we, and Neptune mathematically before they were proven to exist. Physically, maths is right. And that we just haven't got the technology to observe it yet because of it being in the dark outer reaches of our solar system.
Yeah, and it would be very dull, basically. This would be quite a dull object. So very, very hard to see. People seem to think that we have this technology that we can track asteroids, and it's always like front page news. Asteroid, the large size of Everest, has come close to the Earth, and we didn't see it till it passed. It's because they're really difficult. There's lots of objects, and they're really dull. They don't reflect a great deal of light. They're quite hard to see, and so a lot of the time we only see them when it's too late.
Yeah, especially if you think about it, if they're coming in from the outer reaches of the solar system, and especially if they coming in towards us through the sun, if that makes sense, the sun can obscure those dark objects even more so. I mean,
I always thought as well, there's another possibility that potentially this object is pretty big. Planet X, even 5 times the mass of the Earth, is a big object. What if it is actually not that it's way out there and dull? What if it's actually why couldn't it have a similar orbit to the Earth, but actually on the other side of the sun? The sun is massive. If this object was on the other side of the sun,
You're correct.
traversing roughly with us.
If it was in exactly the same orbit and the opposite side of the sun, you wouldn't ever see it because it would always be opposite. The sun would always block your view of it. Yes, correct.
I don't even think it would have to be even exactly the same trajectories. The sun is so massive. You think about like the trajectory of the. So you got the sun, and our blind spot behind the sun is enormous. We only get to see what's around there basically because we're traveling around the sun, don't we? But if the other object is also traveling, even roughly, say if it's over the last 400 or 500 years only, it's been invisible, but before that we could have seen it, we wouldn't know about it because we didn't have the technology to see it. So if it is this sort of thing that maybe is going to reappear, and there are images of the sun that seem to show some sort of object. I think a lot of them are fake images, but there are images out there that seem pretty convincing that maybe we can just starting to appear. Maybe. And then I think NASA is to put in. I don't think NASA talks about this a great deal, but I do think they're putting quite a lot of effort into finding this object, and I worry that they're putting a lot of effort into it because they know we have seen natural disasters. We do have this 12,000 year rough cycle, and I think there's a lot of evidence probably in the Vatican vaults and the American vaults telling us all about this, and maybe that's why they're building things like the South Pole Station, the Amundsen Scott Station. So,
well, supposedly the orbit of the 10th planet is on a plane that's like that. Compared to the other planets all going virtually on a similar sort of plane, not quite, some of them are slightly different, but most of the planets orbit on the same plane, don't they, around the sun. They reckon this one's on a highly elliptical orbit, and they reckon at the moment it's in the far outer Kuiper Belt region, so you would need a telescope in the southern hemisphere somewhere in order to observe it because of the elliptical orbit that they suspect it has. Now, going way back, even in 1983, NASA launched the IRAS telescope, the infrared telescope, and that picked up a 10th planet back then because Pluto was still classified as the 9th planet. It was only declassified in 2006, wasn't it? Due to it didn't meet the three criteria.
Neil deGrasse.
The three criteria. What are the three criteria? The three criteria is hydrostatic equilibrium. Yeah, so as near as spherical. They don't have to be perfectly spherical, but you agree from pictures of Pluto, it looks spherical to the eye from a picture. They need to have orbit around the sun, obviously, and they need to have cleared the local neighbourhood of all of the debris, i.e. it's pulled all of. So because Pluto's in the Kuiper Belt and it's got a lot of other objects, that's why it was declassified as a planet. But anyway, going back to the IRAS telescope from 1983, they observed, using this infrared telescope, an object of 4 to 8 Earth masses on a highly elliptical orbit around our sun on a very long period of orbit, a similar sort of thing of 10,000 year orbit path. So they've known about this for a long time. This isn't the first telescope that's potentially observed this object.
Well, this South Pole object, this South Pole,
telescope.
This South Pole telescope, I cannot imagine how expensive it is to operate a telescope at the South Pole, to keep it there as well. In the summer months, we look after it. In the winter months, that must take an absolute battery. It's funded in part by the Department of Energy, don't know why, and the National Science Foundation, the Polar Programs. So it gets decent funding. It's a 10-meter telescope, which is not small. It's a decent sized telescope, and it's been upgraded every 2 years or so since it was first put in. So I mean, they've not only spent a lot of they've put a lot of effort into this telescope and put it in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. I have to wonder why.
Well, there's a reason, and the reason is that they're not obviously not telling us or not making it public, but there's a reason that they're spending all that money. Yes. Yeah,
exactly. So NASA is looking for something that they're not really telling us about, or they do sort of. You do get the odd little snippet here and there, but very, very little. The Planet X is considered pseudoscience by a lot of people, but the evidence seems to be building that there is this, and not just a planet, a big planet, something large.
Yes.
It's not like Pluto that is small. It's or comparatively almost tiny compared to the Jupiter or whatever. This is a big object, So why are they keeping it secret? They just don't want to be ridiculed, or is there more to it?
Oh, I think it's perhaps because of the periodic destruction that occurs on this planet, and perhaps that it's linked to that, and the fact that they can't protect us from it. They've hidden our history from us, so why wouldn't they hide potentially the return of what does it refer to? I'm sure some of the ancient texts call it the harbinger of death, fire and brimstone raining from above. And that would be what would happen if a large body came from a highly elliptical orbit out in the far reaches of the Kuiper belt into an orbit that brought it close to the inner planets of the solar system. Could also explain why we've got what seems to be an asteroid belt from a shattered planet in our inner solar system. And also how our moon, such a large moon, formed, which is the only geostatic, nearly spherical moon in the solar system, isn't it?
It's very unusual. No, a lot of moons are nearly spherical. That's not a problem. One of the main problems is it's too heavy, it's too dense, and it's too close to us. There aren't any other moons that we've ever seen that are like our moon. Our moon's very unusual.
And combine that with the solar eclipse, with the moon being exactly 400 times smaller than the sun, but being 400 times closer, so it exactly causes a solar eclipse, which is almost perfect. I don't know, that just makes me wonder, that one.
That feels like
we just observing it at the right time in history where it is perfect, or is there something else going on there?
It goes about an inch away from us every year, but as it's 100,000 miles away, that we're going to get nice solar eclipses for a very long time.
Yes.
But there's lots of things about the moon that is odd, and it does seem that the leading theory is that we were hit by something big. I want to say Theia, but I'm going to have to double check.
No, is it Tiamat? I think is that I think in Nibiru. So basically, Tiamat was the planet that's now our asteroid belt, and they said, I think in the Sumerian writings, they state that a moon of Nibiru collided with Tiamat, which created the asteroid belt, obviously wiped life out on Earth and started again, and created the moon from that collision. That's the story.
So then we talk about Nibiru then, because then we're starting to lean, and the Sumerian text, we're starting to lean towards the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki is a great story, and this is what, when people say Nibiru is coming, we're all doomed, they're really talking about the Anunnaki coming back and claiming their children, which is us. So
gods story from heaven. What was it? The gods who came to Earth from the heavens. I think that's what Anunnaki translates supposedly literally to, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, there's lots. We get into the reptilians and the draconians and all this sort of thing. But if we keep it simple on the Anunnaki, that they came here, they wanted a slave race. Initially, it was the Nephilim, but the Nephilim got bored of it and had a bit of a ruck. So they thought, oh well, we'll create you some humans. So they took the indigenous hominoid species, primates, and they juiced them up using DNA and genetic technology.
Using their own DNA,
and this would explain why we've had an evolutionary leap, and we became more intelligent. There was a big leap about 50,000 years ago. There's a massive leap 250,000 years ago that gave us the intelligence that we do have now. So, I mean, when you're talking about, and we don't really understand how that happened. So this would explain it. The Anunnaki need gold to protect their planet. They basically, apparently, they vaporize it and put it into the
atmosphere to create more ozone. Apparently, I think was the
so that when they're way out, they can survive technologically. I don't know why they didn't just stay here, because living here is quite nice. Living on Nibiru sounds crap.
It'd be very, very cold. I don't understand how the atmosphere would maintain itself in those deep regions of space so far from the sun, or retain enough heat to make it a livable planet still. But perhaps that they'd evolved to a point where they were living in structures they've created rather than on the surface of the planet on that planet,
Yeah.
and therefore the outside environment isn't as much of an issue to them anymore. Maybe Nibiru used to have a different orbit around our sun, and maybe when the catastrophe occurred, that threw it out on the highly elliptical orbit and basically killed off any life being able to live outside on that planet. Maybe that all changed, you know, maybe the Anunnaki came to us before that all changed a few 100,000 years ago and created the Adamu race, us humans.
And I do think that with enough technology, with high enough technology, you could survive on a planet that was out there. If we went through the next ice age with enough technology, we could survive it. You know, you create greenhouses, you grow food underground, you do, you know, there's lots of things you can do. You don't need it would be very difficult to survive in large numbers, but you could do it. Maybe the Anunnaki, but again, they supposedly came here, enslaved us, and then
created
left
us as a slave race.
We threw off our shackles. We did it. You know, there's this story about the last great flood was caused by the Anunnaki after the
Nephilim mated.
The Nephilim started mating with humans,
the daughters of men, and created the giants. Yeah,
which is very in line with the Bible story. So when you then do see two stories written down, ancient stories written down like that, you do start wondering, is there a bit of truth in there? There's two stories very similar that were just made up.
As time goes on, a lot of these stories from the past that we've categorized as myths do keep finding actual physical evidence. You know, the Battle of Troy being an example. They found the site of the Battle of Troy, haven't they? And they thought that was just a myth. Biblical cities like Sodom and Gomorrah, they've proven that they exist.
Right, let's go with the basic question. Do you believe a Planet X exists?
Well, given that they've mathematically proven it exists, they've had it peer reviewed, and no one's come and said this is tosh, and they gives it a 99.9% chance of the mathematics predicting its existence correctly. We've previously predicted planet's existence using mathematics, and it's been right. Mathematics is the language of the universe. Yeah, he's right.
I would say I would argue exactly the same. That for 200 years or more, we've been using gravitational mathematics. It's a physics we understand very well. It's not like quantum mechanics and things where we're like toddlers wandering around and we don't really understand it. We understand gravitational. We understand these numbers. Newton did the math back then, and it's amazingly accurate. So, you know, this is math we understand. And as our computational power has just got better and better and better, it's, you know, we're only fine tuning that knowledge. So
humans, humans are we're flawed. We're subject to confirmation bias. We're looking for patterns that we're seeking to see. This, that, the other. But mathematics just doesn't lie. It's logical. And it doesn't lie. It's either, you know, it gives you a black or white generally, doesn't it? It's a yes or no until you go into some of the grayer areas, perhaps in the quantum world. But, you know, I just think if the guy that, you know, that's predicted it with 99.9% accuracy, and this is how we previously predicted, and then later on when the technology's caught up, found those planets, I just don't see why we're not in the same position now, that we just haven't got quite the technology yet. However, perhaps the next telescope going up to replace Hubble, the James Webb, perhaps that will replace it.
And maybe that's also another reason why they're spending so much money to build this telescope in space and replace Hubble. Maybe Hubble didn't find it. I genuinely believe that. Okay, so what do you think about Planet X? Is it a threat to us? Is it a risk? Is there a danger?
Well, given from the ice core samples the cyclical nature of cataclysmic events that occur on this planet, possibly, yes. The fact that our recorded history only goes back barely 10,000 years, and we know humans have existed on this planet with our current brain capacity for 250,000 years. I think Brian Cox states that in Wonders of the Solar System. And we've got that 240,000 years there of sort of lost history where we've had the same brain capability.
Just adjust your thing, mate, just a little bit. It's getting a lot of noises.
Was it? Sorry.
Yeah. No, don't worry.
Sorry, what's the same? The same, we've had the same brain capability for the last 250,000 years, but we've got no real records of any human civilization in that period. That does tend to imply that we tend to get our civilizations get knocked back by reasonably regular catastrophic events of some description, which the ice cores confirm. So yes, I do think it is something to be worried about. I think the governments around the world are aware of it and seem to be putting things in place to try and track it.
I would also argue the wealthy and the powerful have been putting things in place to hide from it when it does come. You see some of these underground bases that they've been built, and they're lush. They're like underground 5-star hotels, bomb shelters, and particularly in North America, there's a lot of them.
Oh, there's
a lot of them that can hold 10,000 people or more.
And they're connected. They're underground railway. They're connected, aren't they, by underground railways with maglev trains that can do 500,000 miles an hour. Have you seen? I've seen some of the pictures of the underground maglevs.
I'm gonna go.
I'm not sure if they're. Oh no.
I believe it when I see it. I've never really looked into it. I will be honest. It's one of those things that I've never really believed. The engineering effort that would require would be phenomenal. But the engineering.
How much money does the Pentagon or the Department of Defense keep losing?
Oh yeah, trillions.
Right. So if you had a secret space program / deep underground military base program, it would make sense where all that money's disappearing to, wouldn't it? Between the two of them.
And to be fair, I am assuming that they would need to use boring technology like we use, not boring like, oh, this is so boring. I mean, large drills basically underground, and that is like how we used to build the Eurotunnel. That would be horrendously expensive thing. But if it's not technology like that, then actually all of a sudden these sort of things become far more possible.
It's almost why Elon Musk is like the deep state's dream, isn't he? It's a private company that's now doing space flight and boring for them. Brilliant.
Yeah. He's using new technology that is supposed to be really, really quick as well, that you can build these large tunnels fast. I think Elon Musk, and he's keeping it really secret as well. He's been really secretive about that one. He's normally quite open, isn't he? But this boring technology he's been really secret about. He's building a test one, isn't he?
Maybe Elon knows a little bit more than he's letting the public know. Maybe he's been read into a few things because of the success and where he's got to, and the fact that we've discussed before with military industrial complex using private companies. It's much easier to compartmentalise all of the research and stop it from being shared with the public. So, like I said, Elon Musk seems like a dream for the American deep state if they are involved in a secret space program and deep underground military base construction.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say he's a wet dream for the American future.
Yeah,
it's like he's sticking his he's sticking his fingers in all the relevant pies for the future, isn't he? Battery technology, space exploration, going to Mars. Boring technology when we're talking about new modes of transportation as well, high speed rail and blah blah blah. He's got his fingers in all those holes, all those parts.
Which means he's either an incredible visionary, which is definitely possible, or he's had some extra information that the rest of the public hasn't had, and that's why he's the incredible visionary that he is.
Yeah, and he's amassed some of the, it's not just him, is it? He's amassed a team that challenges NASA. I mean, look at what he's doing with SpaceX. How spanks them. Look at what he's done with a minute amount of the budget. It says he's talking about going to the moon for 60 million. What did Apollo cost?
No.
An equivalent of billions.
Which also makes you question one of our recent videos as well about NASA and just being a money laundering organisation.
Yeah. They seem to spend a lot of money for doing stuff that is obviously possible for much, much less. You look at the space taxi he's building, the new rocket he's building. He's talking about having 100 of those launched a day to go to put 1 million people on Mars. That's not possible under NASA. Couldn't do that, not even remotely. So, right. So the last question then. Is anything alive on Nibiru? I don't know why we call it Nibiru, to be honest. Is anything alive on Planet X? Could the Anunnaki story be true?
Yes, I think it could be, and it seems like we keep saying this. The more and more the science moves on, we start proving that some of these myths from our past in this 10,000 years of history that we've got barely, it's being proven more of it true and true as time goes on, as the science develops techniques to prove them. So I tend to believe that because all of these ancient cultures seem to have similar or the same stories repeated across multiple cultures across many continents, that they were historical records that they were writing down, not myths, not stories, and that we will eventually probably prove the existence of the Anunnaki and that whole story. Find Nibiru or Planet X or Planet 10, Planet 9 now with Pluto demoted. I just think that it seems more likely that that's going to occur than they just made it all up.
Yeah, I'm going with nah, but I'm going with no. But if they rocked up, I'd be like, nah, shit. I wouldn't be like, I'm shocked to my core. I'd be like, oh. My instinct is no. My instinct is that it was stories that were elaborated upon. That I do think there's a common link to these stories, and I do think giants are interesting.
What about the cuneiform where it depicts our solar system, then, where you've got the where you've got all of it clearly depicts 10 planets, the sun and the moon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't have that technology. You think about things like the Dogon tribe; they shouldn't have that knowledge. They knew that Sirius was a binary star.
Tertiary star system. Yeah, exactly.
We found out in 1950 that Sirius is a tertiary star system. They knew potentially 200, 400 years ago.
Before we had telescopes.
Yeah,
right.
We know they've had that potentially that knowledge for 1700 years, I should say, at least, that we know of.
So either in the past, that tribe had built telescopes previously and they'd regressed back to hunter-gatherers, or somebody somewhere had shared some information with them.
Yeah.
Or something somewhere had shared some information with them.
Yeah, and that's again one of those things that my instinct is, no, probably not, because I always think, for these things, there's always a boring explanation, and I'm going back to boring as in that there's like, and I don't want to be let down, but then there's that saying, and then like sometimes truth is stranger than fiction, and it's true. Sometimes these things are just at the moment it's considered pseudoscience, but then how many things in the past have been considered pseudoscience, like you said,
proven to be correct?
Like the panda was believed to be fake. Was it like 70 or 80? No, just over 100 years ago, something.
5 years before Einstein brought out his theory of general relativity. I think was it Lord Kelvin, the guy who did the temperature scale, Kelvin. He came out and openly stated, there's nothing left to discover in physics.
Yeah.
And 5 years later, Einstein brings out the theory of relativity, which changed our understanding of space-time entirely. And how we even view the universe entirely. So, see, I think we're very arrogant as a species, and we think we know it all. But there's a great saying that I like, that I think is a good note perhaps to end the video on. Is a fool thinks himself to be a wise man. A wise man knows himself to be a fool. I.e., the more you know, the more you open up. There's more to know. You will never reach the end of knowing everything, because the more you understand, it's like exponential. The more there is to understand, and I think that the universe it will be like that eternally. And I don't think you will ever fully understand everything within the universe.
Okay. Today's conspiracy theorist might be tomorrow's historian.
Well,
not when it comes to flat earthers. You're just wrong.